You do not remember the moment it began. You were too young, before language, before guilt had a name, but you felt it. A gaze, invisible and vast, hovering over you like a law you could never challenge. A commandment written not in ink but in fear. The world divided cleanly between good and evil, pure and impure, obedient and damned. That was your inheritance, not a soul, but a surveillance system, not love, but conditional acceptance. And from that moment on, you began to split. You were taught to repress, not to think, to kneel, not to know. The unconscious was never granted permission to speak, only to leak through symptoms, through dreams, through compulsions you still can't explain. Religion did not teach you virtue. It taught you control, not of your actions, but of your inner world. Every desire was suspect, every pleasure criminal. You were told you were born wrong, that your instincts were enemies, that your very being was fallen in need of correction, punishment, purification. And so, you began the long mutilation of the self, the carving of your own psyche into acceptable fragments. The guilt that follows you even now, it is not yours. It was planted, watered, raised like a crop. Guilt became the proof of your supposed decency, but it was never ethical. It was architectural, a scaffolding to hold up a collapsing ego. This is not about belief. It is about structure, about how deeply the divine was weaponized to govern your interior, how sin was rebranded as intimacy, how fear was made sacred. You were trained to confess, but never to understand, to repent, but never to reflect, to obey, but never to listen, not to your body, not to your instincts, not to the dream world that kept showing you where the pain lived. You speak of morality, but what you mean is obedience. You call it conscience, but it is conditioning. There is nothing holy about silence, nothing redemptive about repression. Holiness that cannot survive your anger is not holiness. It is tyranny in ritual form. You were told the cage was safety, that submission was peace. But submission only anesthetizes. It does not heal. The unconscious never believed in your salvation story. It only stored the contradictions. You were not made sick by desire. You were made sick by the war waged against it. And that war, make no mistake, continues every day you flinch from your own hunger, every time you call yourself weak for feeling, every time you shrink in shame for wanting what they said you shouldn't. Do you understand now? The trauma is not just in what happened to you. It is in what you were told to do with your own aliveness. The pain is not merely the result of injury, but of interpretation. You were told your suffering was noble, that submission was divine, that suffering would save you. But suffering did not save you. It sterilized you. It locked you in a story where you are never enough, never clean, never worthy, unless you amputate parts of yourself. You call this humility, but it is fear dressed as virtue. What if the divine was never outside you? What if it was what you had to destroy in order to become acceptable? What if your God was your mirror and they taught you to break it? Your inner world became a battlefield. The superego, that cruel, internalized voice, it didn't arise by accident. It was modeled, preached, praised. It speaks an inherited language. It tells you that wanting is wrong, that need is weakness, that freedom is dangerous. But listen closely. This voice does not want your integrity. It wants your compliance. It doesn't care about your truth. It wants your containment. How many times have you punished yourself in its name? Called your anxiety a failure of faith, your depression a lack of devotion? How many years have you waited for healing from a source that demanded your silence in exchange for mercy? The unconscious is not merciful. it is truthful. And that truth, it is unsanitized, undomesticated, inconvenient. It does not kneel, it remembers. Every repression becomes a symptom. Every denial becomes a distortion. You cannot escape what you refuse to name. You have spent your life mistaking guilt for morality, shame for conscience, silence for peace. But guilt is not an oracle. It is a mechanism, and it has been hijacked to keep you small, to keep you apologetic, to keep you ashamed of being fully human. This is the architecture of the cage. A God that sees everything, a self that must hide everything, and a life spent proving your worth to an invisible judge who never stops watching. It is not enough to reject the dogma, you must expose its residue in your mind. Every reflex to apologize for your anger, every impulse to deny your joy, every voice that says, "Don't feel that, don't want that, don't be that." This is not rebellion, this is recognition, not against faith, but against the psychic colonization done in its name. You are not evil, you are unfinished, you are not impure, you are unintegrated. There is no salvation in self-erasure. There is only pathology. You were taught to pray, but never to question, to fear your instincts more than your indoctrination. But now the question returns, like a haunting. What if the parts of you they told you to kill were never the problem? What if the true corruption was the demand to bury your own voice? The unconscious never forgets. It stores the scripts, the contradictions, the pain swallowed in the name of belonging. But beneath that, something else, something more ancient than doctrine. A knowing, a pulse, a refusal. You can still feel it. The desire to live uncut, the ache for unfiltered experience, the hunger to exist outside the language of sin. Dismantle the illusions not with fire, but with reason. Unravel the scaffolding of fear and guilt that religion constructed in your mind. See how your vitality was branded a threat, not because it is dangerous, but because it could not be controlled. The cage was built by belief, but it can only be undone by understanding its origins in the human psyche. And in the ash, begin again. Not with purity, but with presence. Not with obedience, but with truth. Not with guilt, but with gaze steady, unflinching, your own. You will not be rewarded for staying small. You will not be loved for disappearing. The world does not need another martyr. It needs a witness. A consciousness brave enough to descend, to remember, to reclaim. Because only from within the wreckage of your repression can the real self speak. And it does not whisper prayers, it roars. The self you perform for others is not the self that bleeds in the dark. You know this. You've always known. The smiles, the composure, the small talk, these are not lies, but they are covers. Camouflage for the rawness you were told must remain hidden. Not because it's monstrous, but because it is unmanageable within the world they built. A world where coherence is demanded, where contradiction is punished, where psychic messiness is mistaken for moral failure. But beneath every neatly packaged identity is a scream, a memory that refused to die, a longing that refused to convert. And that scream has shape. It is the shape of the unlived life. You were not designed for clarity. You were not made to be clean. The psyche is a storm, not a sermon. But you were taught to flatten it, to organize your soul around someone else's theology, to align your grief with ritual, to narrate your wounds as lessons from a God who remained suspiciously silent while you shattered. You learned to name your pain as growth, to name your suppression as strength, and so you became fluent in self-deception. You mistook numbness for virtue. You confused deadness with peace. This is the brutal genius of repression. It works. It makes life tolerable. It allows you to function, to perform, to participate. But it comes at a cost. Your own depth, your emotional range, your erotic imagination, your terror and tenderness. What remains of you when you are always translating your feelings into acceptable scripts? What is lost when you only speak in tones approved by the internalized judge? You carry the residue of every doctrine you survived. The fear of being seen, the fear of being felt, the fear of your own interior. And so you flinch from yourself. You spiritualize your dissociation. You call it transcendence when it is abandonment. You call it detachment when it is despair. But the body keeps score. The dreams revolt. The psyche never signs the contract, it only delays the reckoning. There is no escape from the unconscious. There is only postponement. Every act of repression is a loan taken out on future suffering. And one day, the debt must be paid in symptoms, in collapse, in inexplicable exhaustion, in the quiet sense that you are living someone else's life, following someone else's map, inhabiting a self that is more tolerated than loved. You were taught to aspire to goodness, but goodness in the hands of power is a trap, a script, a demand to be digestible, palatable, predictable. But you are not here to be good. You are here to understand yourself. And understanding requires acknowledging the contradictions between your instinctual drives and the moral demands imposed upon you. Freedom does not mean harmony, but the capacity to tolerate these inner tensions without being ruled by them. The jealous one, the vengeful one, the erotic one, the despairing one, the selfish one. These are not impurities. They are dimensions, coordinates on the map of your humanity. What you repress does not disappear. It becomes myth, fantasy, fetish, projection. It finds a way out always, but it no longer answers to you. It acts without your consent. It emerges in displaced forms, in who you hate, in who you idolize, in who you hurt. The unconscious does not rest. It reroutes, it recreates, it reenacts. And if you are not listening, it will scream louder. The anxiety that never leaves, the panic that arrives without cause, the dread that greets you in the morning. These are not flaws in your character. These are signals, clues, invitations. The unconscious does not communicate in language. It speaks in distortion. It tells the truth slant. It needs your attention, not your punishment. But attention requires courage. The courage to sit with what is unbearable, to witness what was exiled, to face the truth that the life you have built may not be the life you actually want, but the life you were allowed. And that allowance came at a price, your inner freedom. So you play roles, you perform safety, you construct identities that protect you from rejection, from abandonment, from exposure. But the cost is always aliveness. The more you edit yourself, the less you feel. And the less you feel, the more you ache. It is a quiet ache, but constant, like a hum beneath everything. A background noise of discontent, too diffuse to locate, too persistent to ignore. You look for meaning, but meaning is not given. It is made. And it cannot be made until you reclaim the materials buried beneath repression, until you retrieve the memories wrapped in shame, the longings orphaned by judgment, the truths you whispered only in dreams. This is not a gentle process. There is no romanticism in excavation. The unconscious is not your friend. It is your mirror, and it reflects without mercy. But in that reflection, there is power. There is a clarity more honest than hope. The recognition that suffering is not random, that neurosis is not madness, that every symptom is a message encrypted, yes, but legible if you are willing to read it. You are not lost. You are layered. Fragmented, yes, but not broken. The fragmentation is not a flaw. It is a survival strategy. A system of internal alliances forged in the face of unbearable demands. The child who split to protect you still lives inside you. So does the one who believed they were unlovable. The one who learned to disappear to avoid punishment. The one who mistook silence for safety. They are not gone. They are waiting not to be erased, but to be integrated. This is not healing. Healing implies a return to wholeness that may never have existed. This is confrontation with the lie of purity, with the mythology of certainty, with the delusion that your pain can be transcended without first being touched. There is no ascent without descent, no freedom without friction, no clarity without collapse. You must go down into the dream, into the rage, into the memory you said wasn't real, into the betrayal that shaped you, into the scream you swallowed, into the night you never left. And there, in the depths, something ancient waits. Not a god, not a savior, but a presence. Wordless, wounded, watching. The part of you that never forgot. That never forgave you for abandoning your truth to fit inside their story. And it does not want apologies. It wants recognition. So look, without flinching, without translating, without seeking comfort. Look at what they told you to hide. Look at what you became to survive. And then, slowly, begin to speak, not in their language, but in your own. Not to please, but to reclaim. Not to be understood, but to be real. Because when you finally speak from that place, the place beneath performance, beneath programming, beneath prayer, something happens. The cage cracks, the narrative collapses, and the self you were, always meant to be steps forward, not clean, not holy, but unmistakably alive. And in that aliveness, there is terror, not because it is wrong, but because it is unfamiliar. You have spent a lifetime in submission not to a god, but to the image of one. An idea fashioned by the fearful, enforced by the powerful, internalized by the innocent. To undo that architecture is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of homecoming. But home is not where you started. It is what you lost in trying to belong. You will grieve, not just the pain, but the time. The years spent mistranslating your hunger as sin. The decades you performed goodness while dying inside. The relationships built on the persona, never touching your truth. You will grieve the comfort of ignorance, because repression, for all its cruelty, is warm in its certainty. It tells you who to be. It tells you who to hate. It tells you why you suffer, even if the reasons are lies. But the truth does not offer comfort. It offers contact, raw, unmediated contact with yourself. And that contact at first feels like violence, because it ruptures the illusion. It unmasks the ideal. It confronts the very defense mechanisms that kept you safe. But safety is not the same as freedom. And the longer you mistake one for the other, the longer you remain a hostage in your own mind. There is no neutral ground between repression and expression. You either live as the warden or as the witness. One guards the prison of inherited belief. The other dares to enter it, not to escape, but to unlock it from within. You cannot destroy the cage from the outside. You must go in. You must feel what you were trained to fear. You must let the fire of your forbidden truths consume the walls of your false identity. And what will remain? Not purity, not enlightenment, but presence. The unbearable presence of everything you are wounded, wanting, unfinished. the presence of paradox, of contradiction, of shadow. And if you can hold that without retreating into theology or denial, then you will have done what few dare. You will have become human. The doctrines will still echo. The old voices will return, sometimes with fury, sometimes with charm. The guilt will surge like a tide, but now you know its name. Now you see its origins. Now you recognize that it was never your conscience. It was your conditioning, and you no longer have to answer to it. This is not liberation in the abstract. It is liberation in the nervous system, in the breath, in the dream that no longer screams, in the memory that no longer dominates. It is liberation in the way you speak to yourself when no one is listening, in the way you hold your desire without apology, in the way you inhabit your sadness without needing to justify it. You were not put here to be holy. You were not put here to be correct. You were not put here to win approval from an invisible father figure whose love must be earned through denial. You were put here to become what you are, to know the full spectrum of your psychic weather, to recognize the way fear disguises itself as faith, and to dismantle every structure, internal or external, that tells you to hide your humanity for the sake of salvation. There is no salvation waiting above. There is only the work of turning inward, of analyzing the unconscious conflicts that keep you repeating the same patterns. You must confront the repressed desires and fears, not to embrace them sentimentally, but to understand how they shaped you. Only through this rigorous self-examination can you begin to live free from illusions. And what is real is not pretty. It is not graceful. It does not fit into the narrative of triumph. It is jagged, unresolved, raw, but it is yours. And it is enough. Not because it is finished, but because it is true. So burn the cage, burn the scripts, burn the God that taught you to be afraid of your own reflection. And from those ashes, build nothing. Let the smoke rise without forming another idol. Let the silence remain, not as absence, but as potential. And when you walk forward, do not look for light. Look for contact. Look for resonance. Look for the feeling in your chest that says, "This is mine. This ache, this rage, this tremble, it belongs to me. I will not surrender it. I will not sanitize it. I will not bow to the voice that says I must become smaller in order to be worthy." Because worthiness was never the question. The question is, will you face yourself, not the idea of yourself, not the healed version, the real one, the one trembling in the basement of your psyche, still waiting for permission to exist. Give it now, without ceremony, without condition, without asking if it's allowed. You are not waiting for permission anymore. You are remembering that it was yours all along. You don't need redemption. You need recognition. Not from others, from within. Not from some celestial ledger, but from the silent places inside you that have watched you perform a life, all while knowing it wasn't yours. Recognition does not come with applause. It comes with collapse, with the quiet horror of realizing how long you've abandoned yourself in the name of being acceptable, legible, safe. And yet this collapse is sacred, not because it feels good, but because it is real. It is what happens when repression loosens and reality returns. You begin to see how much of your identity was built as a defense, not an expression. You see how your beliefs were not chosen, but inherited. How your values were not born from reflection, but from fear. And with that seeing comes grief, vast, unspeakable grief, not just for what you lost, but for what you never got to become. This grief is not a failure of the soul. It is its awakening. Do not rush it. Do not try to transmute it into wisdom. Let it ache. Let it undo you. Let it cleanse your inner architecture of the lies it had to house just to survive. The lies that said your pain must be hidden, that your need was too much, that your joy had to be earned, that your body was shameful, that your voice was dangerous. Those lies were not random. They were precise instruments of containment. And they were always afraid of your fullness, not because it was wrong, but because it was powerful. Because a human being who has faced themselves cannot be controlled, cannot be manipulated, cannot be sold a narrative of unworthiness. That kind of person is not useful to systems built on submission. This is why your awakening will not be celebrated. It will be resisted, not just by the world, but by parts of yourself still loyal to the cage. Parts that whisper, "Are you sure? Are you safe? Are you good?" These are echoes of your training, and they do not disappear just because you've seen through them. They linger. They beg for return. They seduce you with the comfort of the old script. But your task is not to eliminate them. Your task is to outgrow them, to recognize them for what they are, ghosts of a life that never belonged to you. You can nod to them without obeying. You can hear them without folding, because now you answer to something deeper than obedience, your own coherence. Not the fake coherence of belief systems that require disavowal of the shadow, but the real coherence that emerges when you are no longer at war with yourself. And coherence, true coherence, is costly. It will cost you illusions, relationships built on your silence, certainties you once clung to like a raft. But in their place comes something unshakable, a sense that you are no longer fragmented, that you are not living in opposition to yourself, that your rage, your tenderness, your longing, they all belong, that you do not have to amputate your complexity to be worthy of belonging. The unconscious has always known this. It has waited with terrifying patience for the day when your conscious mind would stop defending the false and start integrating the real. And now that you are here, you cannot go back. Not really. You can pretend. You can re-perform the old self, but it will never feel whole again. You will always know the body remembers. The dream world remembers. Your silence remembers. This is the rupture, the irreversible seeing, the fall from grace that is actually the return to truth. And yes, it will alienate you, because the world rewards performance, not presence. But solitude is not always loneliness. Sometimes it is the first breath of your actual life. Sometimes it is the space where your soul begins to speak in a language that was buried for decades beneath duty, shame, and fear. And what does it say? It does not flatter. It does not promise success. It does not soothe. It simply speaks. I am still here. I never left. I am not what they said. I am not what you feared. I am what you abandoned to survive. And you realize survival is not enough. Functioning is not enough. Adaptation is not enough. You were not born just to cope. You were born to unfold, to inhabit yourself without apology, to live not as a ghost in your own body, but as a full participant in the mystery of being. Religion not as faith, but as control tried to sever that. It taught you that being fully human was a problem to be managed, that desire was a test, that doubt was a failure, that the body was a battlefield. But now you see, the real blasphemy was the suggestion that your deepest truths must be silenced for you to be loved. Let them call it heresy. Let them call it ego. Let them call it madness. But you will call it home. Not the home you were given, the home you built from fragments, from ashes. from the slow, painful remembering of what it means to live from the inside out. This is not a path for the faint. It is a descent, a confrontation, a ritual of return. You will not find easy answers here. You will not find closure. You will find tension, mystery, ambiguity. But you will also find peace, not the peace of certainty, but the peace of no longer needing it. Because once you stop asking, "Am I good?" and start asking, "Am I whole?" everything changes. You stop striving. You start listening. You stop defending. You start integrating. You stop seeking salvation. You start creating meaning, and that meaning is yours, not handed down, not imposed, not earned, chosen, fought for, lived every day, in every breath that says, "I refuse to disappear. I will not mutilate my soul for anyone's comfort. I will burn the cage and walk freely through the fire of my own becoming." And so here you are, not healed, not enlightened, not triumphant, but real, finally, unmistakably real. There is no finish line for the soul, no last confession that will cleanse you, no final insight that will grant you peace forever. There is only the work, the inner, endless work of facing what you were told to forget, of remembering that which was buried beneath doctrine, beneath duty, beneath the long shadow of fear. You will still falter. You will still flinch. The old voices do not vanish. They fade. They wait. They test. But you will know them now, and knowledge makes the difference. Not in eradicating the wound, but in refusing to let it dictate your worth. This is the beginning that masquerades as an end. The moment you stop running, the moment you stop repenting for being who you are, the moment you stop measuring your life by how well you have performed their script, you are not here to be seen as good. You are here to see through the lies, through the rituals, through the inherited guilt that was never yours to carry. And in that seeing, to begin not again, but for the first time. You are not pure. You are not safe. You are not simple. You are complex, contradictory, wounded, radiant. You are the unresolved equation of everything you've survived and everything you still yearn to become. That is not a flaw. That is the definition of being alive. So walk forward, not into light, not into darkness, but into yourself, fully, without disguises, without apologies, without the armor of borrowed beliefs. Let them keep their heaven. You have chosen something far more dangerous, far more honest. You have chosen to be here, awake, unhidden, inhabited. This is your liberation, not from sin, but from silence, not from suffering, but from self-denial, not from death, but from never having truly lived. Burn what was never yours, and breathe. You're home now.